Hey friends, it's Gina from the Rebookery channel. Welcome to the series Finding Your Style. In these videos, I'm going to go through my old journals, my old scrapbooks, and see if I can identify when I started to develop my style. A lot of people struggle with finding what it is that makes them different than any other artist, and I'm going to invite you guys along this journey to see if I can figure out what my style is and maybe give you guys some hints, tips, and tricks too. Thanks for joining me.
Hello friends, welcome to the Rebookery channel. Today is episode 1 in my new series, Finding Your Style. And I'm going to start at the very beginning. I'm going to start where I actually started transitioning from scrapbooking to art journaling. And it started with this book. And it was a very unexpected, like I had no idea that this book would change my entire creative life. I mean, it literally did. This book is called 1000 Artist Journal Pages. It was published in 2008. One day I just decided to pick it up. I was big into scrapbooking back in 2007, 2008. As soon as I picked this book up, I could not put it down. I read every word. I pored over every journal page. I researched as much as I possibly could about each one of these artists. I tabbed the pages. I was mesmerized. I had never seen art like this before. To me, art was a very intimidating thing. I was not an art kid in school. Sometime along elementary, middle school age, I had an art teacher that told me, that I wasn't very good at art. And it stuck with me. And so I just carried that in to my adulthood and just thought that I was never good at art. And I will be honest with you, I cannot draw. I cannot draw anything. So when I started to look at these pages, I immediately felt a connection because I was like, I can do this. This is not somebody painting the Mona Lisa. This is just putting a bunch of creative things together and it completes a picture or it completes a story. And I felt empowered. I felt like I could do this and I wanted to do it so bad. So at this time period, I was still scrapbooking, and scrapbooking was safe. And I was kind of a rebel scrapbooking. I would throw in non-acid-free papers every once in a while, and I would have a photo that wasn't straight up and down. I would, tilt it, or instead of cutting my paper, I would tear it. And so I was really kind of getting tired of scrapbooking. I had recorded all of the memories of my kiddos when they were young, and that was the whole reason why I started scrapbooking. And I was really kind of looking for something different, something new, something that was more along the lines of this. And so this was my jump off point. This is my absolute first art journal. And back in 2008, which is when I made this, we weren't calling them junk journals yet. They were still art journals. And one of my biggest influences at that time period was, of course, scrapbooking, because I was still scrapbooking, but was Anthropology, the store Anthropology. That's thunder. If you hear that in the background, sorry about that. I've got my windows open. So Anthropology was a store that was fairly new to Kansas City. And while I couldn't afford any of the clothes there, they had these fabulous catalogs that they would send out, and it would just have, it was like an adult Christmas catalog. Like, it was just a wish list of things that I wanted. And they had a little paper section, and I remember in the paper section they had these file folders, and I just thought I was the coolest thing in the world and bought these file folders. And I thought, well, I'm gonna do something special with these file folders. And I remember my girlfriend that I was teaching with at the time, we would get the new catalog, and then we would, go to school and talk to each other about what was in the new catalog. Like, did you see what was on page 16? Did you see that dress on page 18? And I just couldn't stop looking at those catalogs. I love clothes and I love dressing. I don't know. That's one of the things that gets me out of the bed in the morning is getting to wear pretty clothes. I could never be a uniform person. So these catalogs really called to me. What I came up with was to take the file folders. And I look back now and I know that this would be called a glue book, but at the time I don't think I knew what a glue book was. And what I did was I just took those file folders and stitched them together. Had no idea other than just my grandma had showed me how to do some hand stitching and some basic sewing. I had a sewing machine that I've had since I was about 18 years old. And I was kind of intrigued to get it back out and to see what I could do. I'd never sewed on paper before, but you know, I thought, why the heck not? So I took the file folders, I don't even know how many I have in here, put them together, and they were pretty thick, and then I just took some really thick thread and a big needle, and I just poked holes in here and sewed them as tight as I possibly could. I think, yep, this is the center right here, and just pulled it as tight as I possibly could and knotted it and then slapped a bunch of glue on it. And again, this was my first attempt at ever binding anything. I wasn't trying a technique. This was simply out of necessity. I just knew that if I bound them together like this, they would stay together. So one of the people that I fell in love with in that book was Marianne Moss, and Marianne Moss has a blog called Dispatch from LA, and she is fabulous. She's probably the first art journaler that inspired me and still inspires me today. But what she had and still does is her eclectic mix of papers and remnants and fabric and textures, and then how she puts them together. She has this eloquent way of mixing and matching them together so that it looks like they were meant to be there. So I tried to recreate that in this journal, and I tried to figure out how in the world she sewed her papers together and how she added trim and stuff inside and just the fabric. And I was just playing around with a bunch of different things at this time period. I'm really happy with how it turned out. I haven't looked at this journal in forever. I'm loving looking through it because honestly, a lot of what I did back then, I still do today. So in this series, what I want to do is I want to go back and kind of trace my roots in my art journaling. And I want to kind of see where is it that I eventually found my style, because that's one of the things I struggled with, especially since I had these bad feelings about being an artist anyway. I struggled with me finding my style, and it really didn't hit me until I started reading comments from you wonderful people when you will say to me in the comments, I love your style, and it hit me, and I was like, oh my gosh, I've got a style. I finally found my style. And I don't know, I kind of have trouble figuring out what my style is. I think I know what it is, but it wasn't until you guys started saying that I realized I have a style. So I'm going to kind of trace through here and see what it is that I notice as I go through these journals, and maybe help you guys along your voyage of finding your style too. So a couple of things I want to point out in this journal. I have a nice mix of fabrics, and these were some vintage fabrics that I had just held on to. This was before vintage was big. These were some vintage fabrics that I just had in my stash from a long time ago. My grandmother was a sewer, and my great-grandmother was a sewer, so I just kind of have a thing for fabric, and I used to sew like quilt tops together, so I just kind of have a thing for fabric. Again, I like clothing, so I was always trying to add in clothing. I had an embossing fixation at this time where you would pour the powder on and you would, put it under a heat gun and it would emboss. So I just took these images out of a magazine and glued them together, turned them into little buttons, and then embossed them. So these were some images that I found from the Anthropology catalog, but also some different magazines. This was one of my favorite pages in this entire journal, and it starts with this girl's dress. There's just something about the colors, the texture, the softness. I cannot stop looking at this. And then the velvet, the turquoise velvet, and this turquoise chenille down here with this vintage lace. I noticed I started to put in little remnants of things like little tickets or little tags that had, you know, price tags or something on it, little clothing tags. And I like that because I still do that today. Vintage buttons. I added some paper clips. And so, like I said, this was back in 2008. So I've pretty much kept to this style. I was big on, I don't think washi tape. I wasn't into washi tape at this time. I was into duct tape and any kind of tape I could find that was utilitarian, like electrical tape, or this was a brown packing tape. Didn't use any like drawing skills other than I would outline the pretty clothing that I saw. And the journaling that was in here was so non-personal. Like this would be a journal that literally anybody could say is theirs because there was no personalization from me in this journal. This was just a very generic journal. I had nothing personal in here. So these were some song lyrics that were just running through my head. This is another one of my pages that I just absolutely love. I love the clothing that I have on here, the textured tights that this girl is wearing. But my favorite part is, and this is where I was pulling in my Marianne Moss, is where I was trying my hand at this freestyle stitching on my machine. And so, yeah, that's it right there. Again, I had some vintage trim that was just sitting around. And then I loved this part right here. So this was the girl's skirt. And I took some lace and I think, nope, I stitched it. I took some lace and I stitched it along the edge of her skirt. And to me, that's awesome. That's me right there, because I love the mix, the mix of dimensions. You know, it was 2-dimensional and then I added the lace and made it 3-dimensional and added these little jewels. And I have a thing for shoes, so I love the shoes. Now notice a lot of the, I think all of them have their heads cut off, or I used tape. That was because I had this thing where I didn't want anyone's face. I felt like if someone's face was in here, then it became about that person's face and not about the other images. And so I don't know, it was just a thing with me. I did not want any of these models' faces in my journal, and to this day I still don't. I like just having that covered up and then just letting the beautiful textures and fabrics and stuff show through. Here was my first attempt at collaging, and I was pulling in my little golden books. I think I told you guys that little golden books were my first love. And I have a huge collection of them, and this was where I first started using old books. And I didn't know how I was going to use them, but I started to pair them up with some of these images. Tried a little bit of my artwork here, very basic clouds, and then this looks like some spray ink. And yeah, so this is my first art journal, I suppose, if you want to say. There's not a lot of art to it. This was a big thing at the time period, was taking people's heads and putting teapots and pointy hats and stuff like that on them. And so I was trying that. Here's some more fabric. I loved mixing and matching colors from magazine pages. This was one of my very first attempts at an image transfer. So this was actually a page in a magazine that I transferred onto this folder. I did this one with matte medium. Here was another one, didn't turn out as well. Here's the end. More lyrics from a song. And by the way, if you know what song that is from, put it in the comments below. And then these were some of my saucier little images that I found. So once I did this, I took it to school and I showed my girlfriend, and she was just in awe. She was like, oh my gosh, I want to make one of these, because we loved anthropology catalogs. Okay, so when I go through these and I do these episodes, I always want to go back to, what did I learn from this journal? So I kind of made a little sheet of paper here and just kind of wrote down some things that I want to take away from this little flip through. So what was my theme or my pattern that I noticed in this journal? Well, my artwork was vintage, there was fabric, there was a lot of texture and a lot of sewing. My mind, and this is what, like, I think art journaling has two parts. It has the art part, the visual part, and then it has the mind part, almost like the journaling part. What was my headspace at that time? Because to me, guys, journaling is therapy. Journaling is a beautiful way to clear your head. And while this one didn't look too much like a journal that you use as therapy and to clear your head and to get your thoughts, it's a great way to center yourself. So for this journal, there was nothing personal. I just had song lyrics. My influences, Marianne Moss, and then, of course, the anthropology catalog. Things I liked about this journal, I liked the colors that I had. I liked my sewing and my clothing, my mixing of dimensions, the 2-dimensional and the 3-dimensional. And things that I didn't like, even though I used the magazine images, I felt like they were safe, and it was a great place for me to start. And there are so many beautiful works of art out there with magazine images, but I just wasn't feeling the jam with those. There was just something about them. While I did use them, and you'll see in my later journals, I do use them, but eventually I phase out. I just wasn't feeling the love. And the reason why is because those images were not personal. And that's what I want my journals, I ultimately wanted them to become, was that personal scrapbook. My goal, and I didn't realize it at the time, was I wanted to marry art journaling with scrapbooking and have them be cohesive and have them have the aesthetic value and the artistic and the creative that art journals have, but also have that personal connection that scrapbooks have. So that was my first art journal. What I'd like to encourage you to do is go find one of your first artworks. Maybe it's a scrapbook, maybe it's a journal, maybe it's just a piece of art, maybe it's just a notebook that you wrote in, and ask yourself, what were my themes and my patterns? What was my art like? What was my mind like? What were some of my influences? What were things that I liked? What were some things that I disliked? And if you like this, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, let me know if you have any questions or comments, and I will see you next week with another episode. Bye.